London, 1934. A fog so thick it muffled even the lamplight curled through Belgrave Square as the clock struck 12. Inside the Grand Harrington residence, a single shriek sliced the night. Sharp, trembling, unmistakably mortal. By the time the servants gathered, the once pristine kitchen lay in eerie disarray, copper pans glinting like silent witnesses. And at the centre, slumped beside the hearth, was Victor Harrington, society's most celebrated restaurateur, quite undeniably dead. Chapter 1. The Midnight Scream in Belgrave Square. The fog that hung over London that night was not the ordinary sort, the polite, gauzy mist that wraps chimneys and softens the glare of gas lamps. No, this fog possessed weight, substance, almost intention. It pressed against the facades of Belgrave Square as though seeking entry, creeping through railings, pooling at doorstep thresholds, smothering any sound daring to escape into the night. The clock had only just told midnight when that sound, sharp, blood-chilling, unmistakably human, ripped through the air. A scream, a woman's scream. It lanced through the fog like a knife, startling a pair of constables across the square and sending a late-returning motor car swerving dangerously close to the curb. Curtains twitched. A dog barked once, then fell silent. And within the elegant Harrington residence, servants froze mid-step, as though London itself had collectively inhaled and refused for a moment to exhale. In that brief, frozen instant, two things became clear. Someone had died, and nothing in Belgrave Square would be quite the same again. It was Miss Felicity Darrow, the housemaid known for her usually unshakable composure, who discovered the body. She had gone to the kitchen to prepare the morning stock, a task she performed ritually at the absurd hour of midnight, because the master of the house, Victor Harrington, demanded absolute discipline in culinary matters. Harrington, after all, was no ordinary man. He was London's gastronomic prodigy, a restaurateur whose culinary empire extended from Mayfair to Marseille. A man of ambition, precision, and pride. A man with no room for imperfection. But tonight, perfection had deserted him. Felicity descended the narrow back staircase, humming faintly, the melody of a song she neither liked nor disliked, simply one she always hummed to keep her mind occupied at odd hours. The faint scent of simmering broth met her halfway down. Odd, she thought. The broth shouldn't be simmering yet. At the bottom, she pushed open the kitchen door and stepped into a scene that would haunt her dreams long after the fog cleared. The copper pans lining the wall glinted as though catching invisible fire. The butcher's block lay overturned, knives scattered like fallen soldiers. A pot simmered unattended on the stove, bubbling over in thin, silent rivulets. As her eyes adjusted, Felicity felt the hum die in her throat, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Near the hearth, sprawled on the polished kitchen tiles, lay Victor Harrington, motionless, unbreathing, eyes fixed in glassy astonishment beneath the harsh light. The scream tore out of Felicity before she understood she was the one making it. Within minutes the household erupted. Footmen raced down the stair. Mrs. Potts, the cook, flapped into the room, clutching her apron. Lady Madeline Harrington, the master's wife, appeared in her silk robe, looking pale, beautiful, and curiously composed. The head butler, Mr. Statham, barked orders with professional urgency while fumbling with the telephone. Standing among the chaos, and yet somehow untouched by it, was Captain Lionel Grant, Harrington's brother-in-law, a tall, grave man who watched the kitchen scene with the distant stillness of someone accustomed to death. He said nothing. His jaw was clenched too tightly for speech. By the time Inspector Paul Calder arrived with 2 constables, the kitchen felt like a crowded stage. The air smelled of broth, copper, and fear. "Everyone out," Calder ordered, his voice clipped. "No one touches anything. I want the room exactly as it was found." Exactly as it was found. Even those simple words felt loaded with meaning, though no one yet knew why. It was almost half an hour later when the front door opened once again, this time to admit a small, impeccably dressed man whose presence transformed the atmosphere instantly. He was shorter than any of the constables, but he carried himself with a confidence so exquisite, so deliberate, that he seemed to grow taller with each step he took. Hercule Poirot had arrived. His camel-coloured coat was immaculate. Not a single hair of his signature moustache was out of place. His eyes, bright, curious, unsettlingly perceptive, took in the assembled household with a quick sweep before coming to rest on Inspector Calder. "Bonsoir, my friend," Poirot said, inclining his head. "You have called for my assistance, and I am here with the greatest haste." Calder nodded grimly. "We have a murder, Poirot." And given the victim's prominence, Scotland Yard thought it best to involve you immediately. Poirot's eyebrow twitched upward. "A murder? You are certain? Perhaps the gentleman had a fall?" Calder shook his head. "No fall creates a wound like the one he has." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "then lead me to the scene." The kitchen was quieter by the time Poirot entered. Only the body remained, along with the simmering broth and the eerie sense of disruption. Poirot paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "disorder, terrible disorder." He crossed the room in small, careful steps. A constable moved forward with his notepad, but Poirot waved him away gently. "The kitchen," Poirot said softly, "is like the mind of a great chef. Every pot, every knife, every ingredient, it has its place, its purpose. This—" He gestured to the overturned butcher's block. "The scattered knives, the streaks of broth, is not merely a mess. It is a message." Inspector Calder frowned. "A struggle, most likely." Poirot knelt beside the body. "We shall see." Victor Harrington's face held an expression of shock, as though the last thing he witnessed in life had defied comprehension. His hands were curled into fists, one of them clutching a scrap of white cloth. Poirot gently removed it with gloved fingers. "A cloth from a chef's coat," Calder said. Poirot shook his head. "No. Look closely. This is the fabric of a fine lady's handkerchief, expensive, embroidered." He held it up. It bore a single initial. Monsieur Calder made a note. "Could be Lady Harrington." Poirot's eyes flicked upward. "You leap too quickly, mon ami. Many ladies' names begin with M. We must be precise." He stood surveying the room again. "The broth is over-reduced," he said suddenly. Calder blinked. "What?" Poirot pointed at the pot. "It has been simmering for at least an hour. Yet Miss Felicity says she did not begin it. Who then placed it on the stove? And for what purpose? A murder is a terrible act, but a broth, it is an act of care, of forethought. You're suggesting what? The killer was cooking." Poirot smiled thinly. "Perhaps, or perhaps the broth hides something." He lifted the lid and peered in. "Mais oui," he murmured, "something is missing." Calder looked perplexed. "Missing? From a broth?" Poirot nodded. "The carrots. There are none. Yet the Harrington recipes always include carrots." Calder stared. "Poirot, with respect, this feels like a very small detail." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "In murder, it is always the small details that scream the loudest." When Poirot finally returned to the foyer where the household waited, all heads turned toward him. Lady Madeleine rose immediately, moving toward him with stiff grace. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice trembling but controlled, "please tell me, do you know who killed my husband?" Poirot regarded her for a long moment. She was pale, yes, but not shaken. Her eyes held a curious mix of sorrow and calculation. A woman grieving, or a woman performing? "Non, madame," Poirot replied gently. "I do not yet know, but I shall." He gestured for everyone to sit. "There are questions," he said, "many questions, and I shall ask them with precision." He turned first to Mrs. Potts, the cook. "You were asleep at the time of the scream, yes?" She nodded vigorously. "Dead asleep, sir. I didn't hear a thing. It was Miss Felicity's scream that woke me." Poirot considered her a moment, then moved on. "And you, Miss Felicity, did you notice anything unusual before you entered the kitchen?" She swallowed hard. "I smelled the broth. It shouldn't have been cooking. And I thought I heard something, a clang, like a pot dropped." Poirot nodded. "Merci." He turned next to Lester, Madeleine, who lifted her chin. "I was in my bedroom," she said. "Victor and I retired early tonight. He said he needed to work in his study, so I assumed he went downstairs." Poirot raised a brow. "Did he often work in the kitchen?" "No, never. He hated disorder." Poirot nodded slowly, filing that away. Finally, he turned to Captain Grant. "And you, monsieur? You were also in your room?" Grant hesitated. "Yes, though I thought I heard something around 11:30. Footsteps, heavy ones, but I assumed it was the servants." Poirot's head tilted slightly. "Heavy footsteps? You are certain?" "Yes." Poirot folded his arms. "Messieurs et mesdames, forgive me, but I must say this. Each of you had access to the kitchen. Each of you had reasons, some known, some perhaps yet hidden, to resent the late Mr. Harrington." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Calder frowned. "Poirot, are you suggesting—" Poirot held up a hand. "I suggest nothing. I merely observe, and I observe that this murder," his gaze sharpened, "was not a crime of passion. No, it was a crime of preparation, a crime of design." He paused, letting the silence thicken. "And I assure you, before long, the truth will rise to the surface, just like the missing carrots in the broth." The household stared back at him in bewilderment. Poirot offered a small, enigmatic smile. "For now," he said softly, "we begin." And thus began the case that London newspapers would soon call the kitchen killing, the investigation that would test even Poirot's famously meticulous mind. A murder in a room of perfect order disrupted. A room where every object held meaning, and where the smallest detail could topple the entire illusion of innocence. Poirot stepped away, his eyes narrowing once more toward the kitchen door. "Murder," he murmured. "Always. It tells a story. And tonight, mes amis, the story begins in the most unusual of places." His gaze drifted to the hearth, where the faint simmering of broth still whispered its secrets. "A kitchen," he finished softly, "is meant for creation, but tonight it has created death." Chapter 2. A kitchen in perfect disorder. The morning after the murder brought no relief to the Harrington household. Dawn crept reluctantly across the rooftops of Belgrave Square, its pale light filtering through the lingering fog like a dying candle flame. What little brightness dared enter the Harrington residence was swallowed whole by the atmosphere of dread and whispered speculation that had settled overnight. Hercule Poirot, however, thrived under such tension. When Inspector Calder returned at 7:30, he found the detective already seated in the breakfast room, stirring sugar into his coffee with delicate precision. "Bon matin, Inspector," Poirot greeted without looking up. "You have slept, I hope." Calder snorted. "You know full well I haven't. I spent half the night arranging for the body to be taken to the morgue." Poirot lifted his cup. A man should not lose sleep for the dead, my friend, especially when the living require our attention. Calder pulled out a chair. Poirot, be reasonable. This case is already turning into a circus. Papers are sniffing around. The Yard wants answers. Poirot took a small, satisfied sip. I will give them answers. But first, I must return to the kitchen. Calder frowned. Again? What more can you find there? We've catalogued everything. Poirot rose from his seat. That is precisely why I must return. You have catalogued. I have not yet understood. The kitchen was still sealed, untouched except for the constables stationed outside. When Poirot entered, the air felt unnaturally still, as though the room held its breath in fear of being misinterpreted again. He moved slowly, reverently, like a priest entering a sanctuary. The copper pans gleamed, the stove crackled faintly from residual heat, and the butcher's block lay exactly where it had been overturned. Poirot's gaze swept across the space, absorbing the details meticulously. The disorder, he murmured, is too perfect. Calder shot him a sceptical look. Perfect disorder? Doesn't make sense. Poirot stepped around the knives scattered on the floor. But it does. You see, Inspector, true chaos has a randomness. This, he gestured, is curated, intentional, like a stage scene. Calder huffed. Or a struggle. Poirot crouched near the overturned block. And yet, look. He lifted one of the fallen knives with his gloved fingertips. Not a single drop of blood. Not one blade is missing from the set. A struggle here would be messy. Calder crossed his arms. Someone could have cleaned up. Poirot gave a small smile. A murderer does not clean one knife and leave 15 others scattered to create an illusion. Cleaning suggests precision. Scattering suggests haste. The two are not friends. Poirot moved next to the stove, where the pot of broth sat cold and congealed from the night before. The broth, Poirot said, lifting the lid. It troubles me. So you said, Calder replied, exasperated. No carrots. Harrington always used carrots. Poirot stirred the thickened broth with a wooden spoon. Oui, but that is not all. He pointed. Calder leaned in. What am I looking at? Notice the colour. A darker shade than usual. Poirot tapped the spoon lightly on the rim. Because the broth reduced for too long. Someone put this pot on the stove, very early. Long before Miss Felicity came down. Calder hesitated. The cook? Poirot shook his head. Mrs. Potts is a traditionalist. She prepares broth only after dawn. Ask anyone. And Miss Felicity said she smelled it before midnight. Calder stiffened. So the killer made it? Poirot paused thoughtfully. Or pretended to. He lifted one of the small bowls arranged neatly on the nearby shelf. But this concerns me more. Calder took the bowl, brow furrowed. It's clean. Too clean, Poirot said softly. It has been washed recently, and hastily. Slip your fingers along the surface. Calder obeyed, and blinked. It's tacky. Soap residue. Poirot nodded, because it was washed quickly, perhaps to remove something. He pointed toward the drying rack. But it was placed incorrectly among the others. Mrs. Potts arranges them by size, largest to smallest. This bowl is out of order. Calder groaned. Poirot, no one could notice something like this. Poirot beamed. Ah, but I notice everything. He set the bowl aside. Someone handled this in a rush. Someone who does not know Mrs. Potts's system. Someone who does not belong in this kitchen. Calder's eyes narrowed. A member of the household, then. One of the family. Poirot lifted his shoulders. Perhaps. Poirot turned to the hearth where Harrington had been found. The tiles had been scrubbed, but the faint outline of the body remained ghost-like on their pale surface. Poirot bent low, fingertips grazing the edges. "Here," he murmured. Calder knelt beside him. "What?" Poirot pointed to a faint trail, almost invisible, leading from the hearth to the pantry door. "A smear," Poirot said, "the faintest smear of broth, dragged by a shoe." Calder squinted. "Could be one of the constables." Poirot straightened. "No, I had them remain by the door. This was before they arrived." He gestured toward the pantry. "Let us see where it leads." Yeah. They opened the pantry door. The small room was lined with shelves of spices, jars, sacks of flour, bundles of herbs hanging overhead. A cool air greeted them. Nothing seemed out of place. Poirot entered, eyes darting from shelf to shelf with hawk-like intensity. "Garlic," he murmured, "peppercorns, cognac untouched, but—" He stopped. "What?" Calder demanded. Poirot reached toward a jar on the middle shelf. He lifted it carefully. It was labelled saffron. Calder sighed. "A spice jar. Poirot, please." Poirot opened it. Inside was not saffron. Inside was a small folded piece of parchment paper. Calder's eyes widened. "What's that?" Poirot unfolded it. Calder leaned in to read over his shoulder. It was a handwritten note, brief, hurried, and stained faintly with what looked like perspiration. "The dish is prepared. Midnight. Do not fail me." No signature, no name, only a chilling implication. Calder exhaled sharply. So Harrington was lured down here. Poirot shook his head slowly. Or someone else was. Perhaps Harrington found the note instead. He folded the parchment again. "This is no ordinary kitchen. It is a place of secrets." Calder's brows knitted. "But who wrote it? And the dish? What does that mean? Literal? Figurative?" Poirot gave a thoughtful hum. "We shall ask." When Poirot returned to the drawing-room, the household waited almost too neatly, as though they had arranged themselves into positions of innocence. Lady Madeline sat near the window, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Captain Grant stood near the mantel, posture rigid. Mrs. Potts wrung her apron. Miss Felicity lingered near the door. Poirot entered with an air of grave ceremony. "Mes amis," he began, "I have discovered something unexpected in the pantry. A note." A ripple passed through the room. Poirot lifted the parchment. "The dish is prepared. Midnight. Do not fail me." Lady Madeline pressed a hand to her throat. "Dish," she whispered. "Midnight." Poirot's gaze slid to her. "Does it mean anything to you, madame?" She shook her head too quickly. "No, nothing at all." Captain Grant stepped forward. "May I see it?" Poirot held it just out of reach. "In a moment, perhaps." Grant's eyes narrowed. "You suspect me?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "I suspect everyone. It is only fair." Mrs. Potts raised a trembling hand. "Sir, forgive me, but midnight is when Mr. Harrington always came down to taste the stock. He said flavours were truer at that hour." Poirot nodded. "Did he receive notes, messages?" Mrs. Potts shook her head vigorously. "Never. If he wanted something, he shouted for it." Poirot turned to Miss Felicity. "You, mademoiselle, did you see anyone enter the kitchen last night before you arrived?" She hesitated. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You recall something. Speak." She swallowed. I thought I saw a shadow. In the hallway. A figure moving quickly. But I assumed it was Mrs. Potts." Mrs. Potts bristled. "I was asleep." Poirot tilted his head. "Tall or short?" "Taller than me," Felicity said. "Broad shoulders." Captain Grant stiffened. Calder noticed. "Captain, something to say." Grant's jaw tightened. "I went downstairs for water, around 11, but I didn't go near the kitchen." Poirot eyed him. "And did you see Harrington?" "No." "Did he see you?" Grant hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Just long enough. Poirot stored that hesitation away like a precious specimen. Lady Madeline rose abruptly. Captain Grant is not a suspect. Poirot raised a single brow. On the contrary, madame, he is very much a suspect. As are you, she recoiled slightly. Me, you dare! Poirot lifted a hand. Your handkerchief, madame. A small scrap torn from a fabric bearing your initial was found in the victim's hand. The room erupted. Madeline froze. Grant put a steadying hand on her arm. Calder stepped forward. Lady Harrington, you will need to explain that. Madeline's voice became thin, brittle. I don't know how it got there. Victor and I argued earlier. Yes, but I left him. I went to bed. I didn't. Poirot watched her closely. Arguments, he said softly. Over. What? She hesitated. His obsession with the restaurant. He cared more for his kitchens than for his own wife. Poirot stepped closer. And was there anything else? Money, perhaps. Affairs. Her eyes flashed. Are you accusing me of murder? Poirot bowed his head slightly. I accuse no one. I only seek truth. Miss Felicity suddenly spoke in a small voice. Lady Harrington wasn't the only one arguing with the master. All eyes turned to her. Who else? Calder demanded. Felicity's eyes darted to Captain Grant. The captain! Yesterday afternoon they were shouting. I heard it from the corridor. Grant stiffened. That was private. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Private matters have a way of becoming public in murder. What were you arguing about? Calder pressed. Grant set his jaw. Money. Poirot gave a small hum. Money is a powerful spice, monsieur. It flavors many crimes. Grant glared. I didn't kill him. Poirot stepped back, hands clasped neatly behind him. Someone killed him. That much is clear, and that someone used this kitchen deliberately. They crafted this scene with precision. They wanted confusion, but not too much. Chaos, but not real chaos. He lifted his chin toward the group. This was no spontaneous murder. This was a recipe, written, prepared, executed. He held up the note. And someone here knows exactly what the dish refers to. The room fell into a frozen silence. Poirot smiled faintly. And do not worry, he said softly. I will know soon enough as well. As the household dispersed under Inspector supervision, Poirot lingered alone in the drawing-room. His eyes drifted toward the hallway leading back to the kitchen. He spoke aloud, though no one was present. The kitchen, he murmured, is a place of truth. People reveal who they are by how they cook, how they clean, how they arrange their tools. He tapped the note lightly against his palm. Someone here has left fingerprints, not of the hands, but of the mind. He smiled. And Hercule Poirot. He knows how to read such prints. The hearth crackled faintly, carrying the last whisper of last night's broth. Poirot turned toward the stairs. Before this day ends, he said softly, I shall know which of you is the chef, and which is the murderer. Chapter 3. The butcher's knife that shouldn't exist. The morning wore on with a heaviness that clung to every corridor of the Harrington residence. Servants moved like spectres, whispering with wide eyes, while constables stomped through the halls, their boots a constant reminder of last night's horror. By the time Inspector Calder returned to the kitchen with new reports from the yard, Hercule Poirot had already stationed himself beside the long wooden counter, examining a single object with intense, almost reverent focus. It was a knife, not one of the scattered ones. They had all been catalogued, numbered, measured, photographed. But this knife, sleek, sharp, unsettlingly pristine, sat on the counter as though it had appeared by magic. Calder saw it and stopped dead. Where did that come from? Poirot did not look up. A very good question, my friend. Calder stepped closer. It wasn't here last night. No, Poirot agreed. Because the killer removed it. Calder's jaw tightened. And put it back now? Why on earth would anyone do that? To mislead, Poirot replied, his moustache twitching with quiet satisfaction. To make us believe they had nothing to hide. But alas, he tapped the blade gently. They have made a mistake. Calder frowned. Explain. Poirot lifted the knife delicately. This is a Harrington chef's knife. From the master set, Victor kept locked in his private drawer. Not a single servant has a key to it, only Harrington, Lady Madeleine, and Mrs. Potts. Calder whistled softly. So the killer used this knife? Poirot tilted his head. Perhaps, but tell me, what do you notice? Calder leaned in. The knife gleamed under the kitchen light, its surface smooth, its edge immaculate. No blood, Calder muttered. Not a trace. Poirot nodded. Exactement. Which means one of two things. Either this is not the murder weapon, or the killer cleaned it too well. Calder straightened. Is that possible? To clean a knife perfectly? Poirot looked amused. Inspector, we are in a kitchen. Cleaning is an art. But cleaning without leaving trace? That is a talent, and a sign of guilt. He turned the knife over, revealing a tiny indentation near the hilt. Calder squinted. What's that? Poirot smiled. A nick, a flaw. This knife has been damaged. Mrs. Potts would never allow such a thing to remain in rotation. Calder's eyes widened. So the knife was used recently? Poirot nodded. Very recently. He crossed the room to the drawer beneath the counter, the one Calder had inspected the night before. Poirot pulled it open. It was empty except for a velvet lining and a faint imprint in dust where one knife had once lain. This, Poirot said softly, is the missing place. Calder rubbed his temples. So someone took one of Harrington's finest knives, used it, hid it, then put it back after the murder. Poirot shook his head. No. Someone took it before the murder. Someone prepared. He spoke the word with gravity. Calder exhaled slowly. Premeditation, then. Poirot walked back toward the counter, tapping the flat of the knife once more. And more importantly, he said, a knowledge of this kitchen, a familiarity with its rules and secrets. He paused, turning toward the door. Let us see who among our suspects knows the most about knives. The suspects gathered once more in the drawing room. Poirot stood before them like a schoolmaster, addressing unruly children. In the kitchen, Poirot began. A knife has reappeared. A knife that should not have been touched. Lady Madeleine stiffened. Why shouldn't it have been touched? Poirot lifted the blade. This knife belonged to your husband's private set. Only 3 people had access to it. Mrs. Potts looked horrified. Sir, I would never touch the master's private tools. He would have dismissed me on the spot. Captain Grant crossed his arms. I don't see how a knife proves anything. Poirot turned to him. You, Captain, have you ever handled these knives? Grant frowned. No, I barely entered the kitchen at all. Poirot smiled. Yet Miss Felicity reported hearing your voice in heated argument with the victim just hours before his death. Grant's jaw clenched. We argued? Yes, but I didn't kill him. Poirot stepped closer. Then perhaps you can assist me. Tell me, he held the knife upright. Do you know what this indentation means? Grant blinked. It means the knife hit bone, I suppose. Poirot's moustache twitched knowingly. Ah, a curious guess for a man who barely enters the kitchen. Grant froze. I just assumed. Poirot turned away before Grant could recover. Lady Madeleine, he said smoothly, you had access to these knives. She looked pale but calm. Access, yes, but I never used them. Victor insisted I stay out of his kitchens. He said I would disrupt his system. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and yet your handkerchief was found in his grasp. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot turned again. "Mrs. Potts," he said softly. The cook looked ready to faint. "Sir? You know every knife in this kitchen, do you not?" She nodded shakily. "Every one. And this knife," he held it up. "Do you recognize the flaw?" Her eyes widened instantly. "Yes. Oh, yes, sir. That nick appeared last month when the master cut through a frozen joint too quickly." Poirot's brows rose. "So, you confirm this is Victor Harrington's personal knife?" Mrs. Potts nodded again. "Without a doubt, sir." Poirot's voice softened. "Then tell me, did you see it in its place yesterday?" Her gaze darted nervously. I can't be certain. I didn't check the private drawer yesterday morning." "Merci," Poirot said gently. He turned his gaze to the final suspect, Miss Felicity. She flinched. "Yes, sir. You, mademoiselle, are the only one who enters the kitchen at midnight, the only one with routine access at that peculiar hour." Her face whitened. "But I didn't touch that knife. I swear it." Poirot studied her. "Perhaps. But someone used the kitchen last night before you arrived. Someone who did not know where the bowls belonged. Someone who tried desperately to erase their presence." He tapped the knife once on the table. "And someone who knew exactly how to remove a knife from a locked drawer." "Disco, Madeleine spoke suddenly, voice trembling. "Poirot, are you saying the murderer had a key?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui." Calder stiffened. "So, one of the three." Poirot lifted a hand. "Not necessarily. A key can be borrowed, stolen, copied, but it narrows our field." He held up the knife once more, letting the light catch its flawless edge. "This knife is the first real clue. Not a red herring. Not a staged element. A truth." He looked around the room. "And the truth always points in one direction." He paused long enough for the air to sharpen. "Towards someone who knew Harrington intimately. Someone who understood his routines. Someone who knew the value of this knife." His gaze settled on the group. "And I assure you, by the time I find the matching trace to this indentation, the murderer will have nowhere left to hide." The room fell silent. Poirot placed the knife gently on the table. "A blade tells a story," he said softly, "and this one is beginning to speak." Chapter 4. Suspect Number 1. The Envious Sous-chef. The following morning broke with a brittle stillness, as though the entire Harrington residence held its breath. In the conservatory, transformed into a temporary interview chamber lit by pale winter sun, Hercule Poirot sat across from the first suspect. Hector Blythe, sous-chef to the late Victor Harrington, perched rigidly on the edge of his chair. His white uniform was spotless, pressed within an inch of its life, but his fingers trembled around the brim of his hat. Poirot observed him with the calm, intent curiosity of a man who never blinked unless it served a purpose. "Alors, Monsieur Blythe," Poirot began, folding his hands with careful symmetry. "Let us speak of your employer. You worked in the Harrington kitchen for 6 years, is it not?" "7, sir," Hector corrected, voice brittle. "Started when I was 21. Learned everything from Mr. Harrington." "Everything?" Poirot tipped his head. "Or almost everything." A flush rose behind the sous-chef's ears. He stammered, "Well, there were things he never shared. His signature sauces, his family recipes, techniques he kept locked away, figuratively and literally." Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. "You speak of the locked cabinet in the kitchen." "Yes, sir, only he had the key." Hector did not add, though it hung between them unsaid, that he had long resented this. Poirot saw it plainly. Jealousy, frustration, a burning desire to rise, but forever overshadowed by a master whose reputation rested partly on secrecy, and secrecy breeds bitterness. Poirot leaned back, letting silence swell like a rising tide. When Hector finally squirmed, Poirot asked, "Tell me of last night, from the beginning." The sous-chef inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Dinner service ended at 9:30. Mr. Harrington dismissed the staff early, said he wished to experiment alone. He'd been in a foul mood all day. His eyes flicked upward, as though searching memory for accuracy. I left the kitchen at 10. I was in the servants' quarters until the scream. Everyone heard it. Everyone? Poirot repeated softly. You mean everyone who was there? Hector blinked. Well, yes, I hadn't left the property. Poirot's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. But you were alone in the servants' quarters? No one saw you? Hector's throat bobbed. That's correct, sir. An uncorroborated alibi. No detective overlooks such things. Poirot tapped a finger against the table. And your relationship with Monsieur Harrington, it was harmonious. The sous-chef hesitated, and that hesitation was more telling than any words. He was demanding, perfectionist, unyielding, but he made me the chef I am. A chef you are, Poirot repeated, yet still a sous-chef. That cut deeper than knives ever could. He never promoted me, sir. Said I was too impatient, too emotional, but I gave him everything. Poirot watched the young man's shoulders tighten, the way his hands gripped his hat like a lifeline. There were many who loved Victor Harrington's brilliance, but fewer still who loved the man. That mattered. Let us discuss the weapon, Poirot said at last. The butcher's knife. It belonged to the kitchen. But it was spotless. Too spotless. Someone cleaned it after the killing. Would you say, Monsieur Blythe, that you are familiar with the maintenance of such knives? Of course, Hector said quickly. Every day. Harrington insisted his blades gleam. Yet this knife gleamed a little too much, n'est-ce pas? Poirot murmured, as though freshly polished, after use. Hector's face paled. Are you suggesting? Poirot raised a hand. I do not suggest, I observe. Another silence stretched as Hector fought visibly with his thoughts. At last, he whispered, I didn't kill him, Mr. Poirot. He may have frustrated me. He may have humiliated me, but he also took me in when I had nowhere to go. He saved me from running the streets. I would never repay him with murder. Poirot nodded gently, though his eyes were needles. Your loyalty, I do not doubt. Your temper, however. Hector's posture stiffened defensively. I'm not proud of my temper, sir, but I control it. Do you? Poirot asked, voice soft but merciless. You smashed a copper pan against the counter not 1 week ago, did you not? Over a critique of your roux? Hector's eyes widened. That was, how could you? Someone told you that out of spite. Poirot said nothing, which was answer enough. Someone had indeed spoken. Hector clenched his jaw. I admit I have a temper, but I would never hurt Mr. Harrington. I swear it. Poirot rose from his chair, walking toward the tall conservatory windows. His reflection stared back at him. Immaculate suit, polished shoes, moustache curled like a proud signature. Monsieur Blythe, anger is a flame. Small, controlled, it warms. Unchecked, it destroys. He turned. Tell me, who resented Monsieur Harrington more than you? Hector blinked rapidly, stunned. More than me, but— Yes, Poirot said, waving a hand. Perhaps you felt overlooked. But resentment? True resentment, that runs deep. Who else wished him ill? For the first time, Hector seemed to consider the question with genuine thought. He swallowed. Mrs. Harrington, he said quietly. Though she hides it well, sometimes too well. Poirot studied him. And why would the widow resent her husband? Hector's voice dropped to a whisper. Because Mr. Harrington was planning to remove her from his will. Poirot's brows lifted. Ah, and how do you come to know this? He spoke of it last week. Not to me directly, but loudly enough that anyone working nearby might overhear. He said she was draining him financially with her social schemes, said she was bleeding him dry. And when did Madame Harrington learn of this? I think she already knew, Hector murmured, or suspected. She watched every coin he spent. She was, how do I put it, always calculating. Poirot's small eyes glimmered. Merci, Monsieur Blythe. You have been most helpful. But before Hector could relax, Poirot added quietly, one last thing. The locked recipe cabinet. The key is missing. Hector stared, stunned. Missing? Yes. And it was taken before Monsieur Harrington died. But why would anyone steal his recipes? Poirot's smile was thin, because they were worth more than gold. As Poirot walked Hector to the door, the sous-chef paused. Mr. Poirot, do you believe I killed him? Poirot met his gaze evenly. I believe, monsieur, that you are a man of passion. Passion may lead to greatness, or to tragedy. For now, I keep an open mind. Hector nodded shakily and left. Poirot remained in the conservatory, hands clasped behind his back. He replayed every gesture, every tremor, every unsaid confession that had flickered through the young chef's eyes. And then his gaze drifted to the frost-rimmed garden outside. Too many secrets in this house, he whispered, and secrets, like the steam of a soup, always rise. He checked his pocket watch. In 10 minutes he would speak with the widow, and he suspected that conversation would reveal far darker flavors. Chapter 5. Suspect number 2, the widow. With a smile, Madame Eleanor Harrington entered the drawing-room as though floating, her silk gown whispering across the polished floor. If she mourned, she did so with exquisite control. A strand of pearls rested on her throat. Her dark hair was perfectly arranged, her expression composed into the kind of dignified sorrow fashionable among society hostesses. But her eyes, cool, glinting, restless, betrayed the truth Poirot had already suspected. Grief was not her dominant emotion. Mr. Poirot, she said softly, extending a gloved hand, I understand you wish to speak with me. Poirot bowed over her fingers with the faintest hint of courtesy. Madame, it is necessary. You have suffered a terrible loss. Yet I must ask you questions most unpleasant. I am accustomed to unpleasantness, she replied, lowering herself gracefully into a high-backed chair. My late husband ensured that. The statement, delivered with quiet poise, struck Poirot with more force than a shouted accusation. He observed her as he took a seat opposite. Every movement was measured, every breath carefully drawn, as if she were performing grief rather than feeling it. You and your husband, Poirot began, were not on the best of terms, I gather. Eleanor smiled, a small brittle curve of the lips. Victor and I had differing temperaments. He lived for his kitchen, his restaurants, his reputation. I lived for society, for hosting, for cultivating the Harrington name. We clashed, yes, but murder? She spread her hands lightly. Hardly my style. Poirot's moustache twitched. Style, madame, is irrelevant when passion enters the matter. She tilted her head. Passion? Oh, Mr. Poirot, Victor and I abandoned passion years ago. Ah, Poirot murmured, but resentment is passion in a colder form, n'est-ce pas? Her eyes hardened. If you are implying that I resented my husband, then I must correct you. I despised him. Few suspects confessed so boldly. Poirot did not react except to fold his hands neatly. Despised him enough to kill? She laughed, a light musical sound utterly out of place. No, Mr. Poirot. If I wanted Victor ruined, I would have done so socially, not physically. A scandal here, a whisper there. Death, too crude. Crude, Poirot repeated, yet effective. She regarded him coolly. Victor's death may have freed me, but not in the way you imagine. Ah, Poirot said. You refer to your late husband's intentions for his will? For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion, fear, quickly masked, passed across her eyes. So you've heard. From Monsieur Blythe, Poirot said. He overheard your husband threatening to remove you from his beneficiaries. Eleanor pressed her lips together. Victor liked to threaten. He enjoyed the power, but whether he would actually disinherit me. She hesitated. I suppose we will never know. Unless, Poirot said gently, we find the updated will. She stiffened. Updated? Oui, it is missing. Eleanor's face froze in a perfect porcelain mask. Missing? Are you accusing me of taking it? Poirot shrugged lightly. I accuse no one. I only note that its disappearance benefits you. She rose abruptly, pacing toward the window. Outside, the winter sky glowed a soft grey, clouds gathering like silent. Isha witnesses. You do not understand, she said, voice trembling now. Though whether from anger or fear was unclear. Victor was cruel. He controlled every aspect of my life. Even the smallest expense required justification. He kept me like a prized ornament, displayed, admired, but never trusted. Poirot joined her in silence for a moment, watching the brittle silhouettes of bare trees. Did you confront him? Of course I did, she whispered. Last night. We argued, loudly. I accused him of humiliating me, of pushing me aside in my own home. He told me I was ungrateful, that he built everything without me. Her hands clenched into fists. He told me I would be nothing without him. Words, Poirot said, can cut as sharply as a blade. She turned toward him, eyes flashing. I didn't kill him. Poirot studied her with the delicate patience of a man assembling a puzzle. Madame, did you enter the kitchen after the argument? No, she said firmly. You did not leave a message for him? A note? An apology? Or a threat? Her eyes darted. Just once, a fleeting tremor of the mask. I left nothing. Poirot saw the lie as clearly as if it had been written upon her forehead. He changed his approach. Tell me, madame, did your husband ever accuse you of wasting money for your social schemes? Eleanor's jaw tightened. He accused me of everything if it suited his mood. But these schemes, Poirot continued gently, one hears whispers that they were failing, that there were debts. She stiffened. Gossip, all of it. Yet debts, madame, have a way of growing. Like vines, they choke, they squeeze, they create desperation. Now genuine anger ignited in her gaze. You think I killed him for money? Poirot did not blink. Did you? The silence stretched, long and taut. Then she exhaled sharply and sank back into her chair. I wanted freedom, Mr. Poirot. That much I admit. I wanted a life where I could breathe, where every decision was not scrutinized. But murder? No. Killing him would have tied me to his memory forever. She looked down, voice quiet. I wanted to be rid of his shadow, not imprisoned by it. Poirot studied her face for several seconds, and in that time he read truths and subtle half-truths. She was intelligent, cunning, deeply emotional beneath the polished veneer. She was capable of dark thoughts, perhaps even dark deeds. But was she capable of butchery? Madame, Poirot said finally, the knife used in the murder was cleaned, meticulously. as though someone accustomed to maintaining appearances wished to disguise the violence. She stiffened. "Are you suggesting I would soil my hands with blood, only to wash them clean again?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "I suggest that you, madame, understand presentation and lies." Eleanor's smile returned, slow, enigmatic, unsettling. "Do not underestimate me, Mr. Poirot. I am far more dangerous socially than I could ever be physically." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Of that, madame, I have no doubt." As he stood to leave, she added quietly, "There is someone else you should question, Mr. Poirot." Poirot paused. "And who is that?" Her gaze sharpened. "The gentleman who never eats." Poirot's brows lifted. "Monsieur Alistair Green?" "Yes." Her voice was a whisper of scandal. "He and Victor had secrets between them." "And secrets, Mr. Poirot, can kill." Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, Madame Harrington. You have given me food for thought." As he stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him, he allowed himself a rare frown. The widow had lied. About what, precisely? He did not yet know. But the lie hung in the air like perfume. And lies, Poirot thought, always linger longer than truth. Chapter 6. Suspect. Mother 3. The gentleman who never eats Alistair Green waited for Poirot in the dimly lit library, where the scent of aged parchment mingled with the faint spice of pipe tobacco. He stood near the fireplace, tall and thin as a lamppost, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that matched his solemn gaze. His face, angular and pale, carried a peculiar restraint, as though emotions were things he kept locked behind ribs of iron. When Poirot entered, Green turned with a smooth, predatory grace. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice low and velvety, "I hear you have questions." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, Monsieur Green, you were among the guests last night, and it seems you and Monsieur Harrington shared a history." Green allowed a thin smile. "Victor Harrington and I shared many things, history, disagreements, and secrets." He gestured towards a leather armchair. "Please." Poirot sat, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care. "Let us begin, monsieur, with the most curious matter. You attend every Harrington dinner, yet you never touch a morsel." Green's lips curved faintly. "I am a man of simple tastes, and Victor's culinary extravagance has always struck me as unnecessary." "Unnecessary," Poirot repeated. "To call the passion of a master chef unnecessary, it is a bold opinion." Green shrugged. "We all have our preferences. Mine is abstention." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Is it merely preference, or something else? A health condition, perhaps?" Green's smile hardened. "No condition, merely choice." Poirot knew a deflection when he heard one. "And yet," he continued, "you were often seen in heated discussions with Monsieur Harrington, perhaps over your disinterest in his art." Green chuckled softly. "Harrington considered my refusal to eat his dishes an act of rebellion. I considered his insistence arrogant. We disagreed. But disagreement does not make murder." Poirot steepled his fingers. "It prepares the motive, however." Green's eyes narrowed. "If motive is what you seek, look elsewhere. Had nothing to gain from Harrington's death." "On the contrary," Poirot said mildly. "I hear, monsieur, that you and Harrington were partners once, financial partners, and that the partnership ended with bitterness." Green stiffened, the smile slipping. "He told you that?" "It is known," Poirot said, though truthfully he had pieced it together from fragments, hints, and a letter found in Harrington's desk. "Harrington borrowed heavily from you years ago, did he not? You helped him build his first restaurant." Green stared into the fire, jaw clenched. "Yes, I believed in his genius, and he repaid my investment, eventually. But by then, Our partnership had soured. Because of the scandal, Poirot said quietly. The fire crackled sharply. Green's voice chilled. I did nothing wrong. But you were accused, Poirot replied. A false rumour that you bribed a competitor. A rumour that originated, it seems, from someone in Harrington's circle. Green turned, and for the first time emotion burst through. Anger, raw and controlled only by effort. Victor ruined me. My reputation, my career. I lost clients. I lost everything. Yet you remained acquaintances? Poirot asked gently. Green barked a humourless laugh. Victor wished to make amends, as he called it. He invited me to every dinner, every event, a public parade of reconciliation. But he never apologised, never once. And so you did not eat, Poirot said, your silent protest. Green did not respond. Poirot leaned forward. Monsieur Green, where were you when the scream was heard? In the gallery upstairs, Green answered. Alone. Alone, Poirot echoed, with no witness to confirm. Green's eyes flashed. I am not a man who requires alibis. All men, Poirot corrected gently, require alibis when murder is concerned. A long silence stretched between them. The fire's glow painted Green's face in flickering amber. Poirot waited. He sensed the man wished to speak, if only carefully. Finally, Green exhaled. I did go to the kitchen. Poirot's eyes sharpened. When exactly? Before the scream, Green said. At 11:15, I wished to speak with Victor privately. The admission was bold and dangerous. Poirot remained still. And what passed during this conversation? Green's voice lowered to a near whisper. I asked him for the truth. What truth? Green's expression tightened. Whether he had been the source of the rumour that destroyed me. I suspected for years, but I needed to hear him say it. Poirot absorbed the words carefully. And did he confess? Green's jaw clenched. Yes. Poirot inhaled softly. He told you he destroyed your reputation. He said it was nothing personal, that he needed to eliminate competition while seeking investors, that my downfall was merely an unfortunate necessity for his success. Poirot felt a cold ripple. One suspects many motives, but very few sting with this level of betrayal. I see. I was furious, Green said, voice shaking. I told him he was a monster. He told me I lacked ambition. We shouted, and then I left. You left him alive, Poirot said. Yes. And you did not return? No. Poirot stared at him for a long moment. Monsieur Green, in the kitchen we found a glass, filled with wine, untouched, a glass placed at the head of the table. Was it yours? Green's expression did not change. Victor always poured me a glass. A habit, an insult really. You did not touch it? No. Poirot tapped a finger lightly. Curious, because there were fingerprints. 2 sets, Harrington's and someone else's. Green's eyes flickered. Are you accusing me? Poirot shook his head slowly. I accuse no one. Not yet. But someone touched that glass. Someone who did not drink from it. Someone who wanted to make it appear as though you had accepted Harrington's offering. Green's face darkened. Someone wishing to frame me. Poirot did not speak, but he saw the realization bloom across Green's features. Someone had been in the kitchen after Green left. Someone who wanted evidence pointing his way. Green leaned forward, voice tight. Poirot, whoever killed Victor wants me ruined a second time. Poirot rose. Perhaps, monsieur, or perhaps it is a distraction, a red herring. Green stood as well, posture rigid. I did not kill him. I do not think you did, Poirot murmured, but someone wishes me to consider it. He reached for his coat. Just as he did, Green added quietly, Victor was hiding something else, something he planned to reveal at the dinner party next week. Poirot paused. Reveal? Yes. He said it was a new beginning. Whatever it was, someone feared it. Poirot's pulse quickened. Secrets, deception, a missing key, a stolen recipe, a destroyed reputation. And now a revelation that had been silenced by murder. He turned to Green. Merci, monsieur. You have given me much to consider. As Poirot left the library, he felt the tendrils of the case tightening. The killer was weaving a careful narrative of lies, and he, Hercule Poirot, would soon tug one thread too many. Chapter 7. Poirot receives an anonymous letter. The Morning Post arrived with an unusual sense of ceremony. A maid, pale and trembling, approached Poirot as he stood in the main hall studying a portrait of Victor Harrington. The late restaurateur stared back from the canvas, broad-shouldered, self-assured, eyes glowing with the pride of a man who believed himself untouchable. Poirot, however, had begun to see differently. Pride, after all, is often the first step toward ruin. Sir, the maid whispered, curtsying shakily, this letter, it was left at the door, not delivered, just placed there. Poirot accepted the envelope delicately with 2 fingers. It was plain, unmarked, sealed with no wax crest, addressed simply Monsieur Poirot, the handwriting sharp, slanted, almost nervous. He turned it over. No return address, no stamp. It had been delivered by hand. Merci, he said gently, and the maid fled as though carrying it had cursed her fingers. Poirot carried the envelope into the small study he had appropriated and closed the door behind him. He sat, smoothing the letter upon the desk until every corner was perfectly aligned. Then, with a crisp motion, he slit it open. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. He unfolded it slowly. The message was short. You seek the truth in the wrong places. The key was not taken for recipes. It was taken for protection. Ask about the cellar. No signature. Poirot stared at the words long after reading them. His mind moved, swift and methodical, arranging possibilities as though placing pieces on a chessboard. The key. He had assumed it opened only the recipe cabinet. But what if there was another lock? Another secret access? Protection? Protection from what? Or from whom? Then, ask about the cellar. Poirot frowned. In all his time at the Harrington estate, no one had mentioned a cellar. Not the servants, not the widow, not the sous-chef, not even Green. A peculiar omission, too peculiar. Someone wanted him to know. Someone who feared being overheard. Poirot folded the letter neatly and tucked it into his pocket. Then he rang the bell for Mrs. Wexley, the housekeeper. She appeared minutes later, stout, stiff-backed, and severe. Yes, Mr. Poirot. How may I assist? Madame, Poirot said pleasantly, I wish to see the cellar. Her reaction was subtle, but Poirot, master of the subtle, saw it in a heartbeat. Her shoulders locked, her eyes flickered, her breath hitched. The cellar, sir, she repeated carefully. Oui, Poirot said, the cellar. Mrs. Wexley folded her hands. It is quite draughty and filled mostly with old stock. Mr. Harrington rarely used it. Then it will not take long, Poirot replied. For several seconds she did not move. Then, with a clipped nod, she turned and led him through the corridor toward the back of the house. They passed servants who watched with thinly veiled anxiety. The atmosphere in the estate had grown tense, thick as the fog that had swallowed the house on the night of the murder. At the end of the corridor, Mrs. Wexley stopped before a narrow wooden door. A heavy lock hung on the latch. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A lock, madame, for a room of old stock. Mrs. Wexley swallowed. Precaution, sir. There were incidents with wine theft some years ago. Poirot said nothing. The housekeeper struggled with the lock. hands shaking just a little too much. After a moment, she swung the door open, revealing a steep staircase descending into shadow. Poirot pulled a small electric torch from his pocket. "Merci, madame. You may return to your duties." She hesitated. "Are you certain, sir? The cellar can be quite dark." "Darkness," Poirot replied, "is merely truth without its clothing." He stepped inside. The air was cool, thick with the earthy scent of stone and dust. His footsteps echoed softly as he descended, his torch sweeping across rows of old crates, wine racks, and forgotten furnishings. The cellar stretched larger than expected, its far corners swallowed in gloom. Poirot took his time, scanning, absorbing, cataloguing. Nothing seemed immediately amiss, until his torch caught the glint of metal on the floor. He knelt, a brass key, a key identical to the one missing from Harrington's recipe cabinet. Poirot turned it over in his fingers, cold, recently handled. Someone had been here. Someone had dropped or placed it deliberately. Then his light swept upward and froze upon the far wall. A door, not a cellar door, but a reinforced one, iron-banded and bolted. A door far too strong for old furniture and wine. Poirot approached it slowly. A small keyhole waited in the centre of the lockplate. The brass key fit perfectly. But before he turned it, Poirot paused. Why would someone send him an anonymous letter? Why reveal this secret? Because they feared something worse than discovery. Poirot took a breath and turned the key. The bolt slid back with a groan. He pushed. The door opened into a room colder than the cellar itself. Shelves lined the walls, holding ledgers, boxes, sealed envelopes, records, financial records, personal files, correspondences, all meticulously organized. And at the center, a single table with a lantern atop it. Poirot switched it on. The light revealed a ledger, open to a page marked with a red ribbon. He leaned closer. Loans, payments, transfers, names he recognized, names he did not. And Victor Harrington's signature on every page. Poirot's heart tightened. It was not a record of business success. It was blackmail. Dozens of entries. People from society, people from Harrington's staff. Even Poirot's breath caught Eleanor Harrington. Large amounts, marked with the word continued silence. Victor Harrington had built not only a culinary empire, but a quiet one of coercion, secrets, and control. This was the reason for fear, for resentment, for ruin. This was the motive that tied every suspect together. Then Poirot noticed something else. A second ledger missing. The gap in the row was unmistakable. Someone had removed a book recently. Someone who feared what it revealed. Someone who had likely killed to keep it hidden. Poirot closed the remaining ledger and gently locked the room again, slipping the key into his pocket. As he ascended the stairs, he felt the shift, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Victor Harrington had not been killed because of jealousy, or money, or revenge alone. He had been killed because of truth. And now the killer knew Poirot had discovered the cellar. The game had tilted, and someone upstairs had begun to panic. Chapter 8. The clue inside the copper pot. A hush fell over the Harrington kitchen as Hercule Poirot motioned for everyone to remain precisely where they stood. The servants exchanged uneasy glances, while Inspector Flint folded his arms, already impatient, already doubtful. The kitchen smelled faintly of cold broth and extinguished fire, an odour that clung to the copper pots hanging neatly above the long preparation counter. Yet one pot, Poirot had noticed earlier, was not quite like the others. It gleamed a little too brightly, as though it had been polished recently, perhaps suspiciously recently. Poirot stepped forward, fingertips grazing the copper surface. "Mes amis," he said softly, "a kitchen is a place where habits become ritual. Every utensil, each pot has its way of living. This one, however, it has secrets." Flint groaned. "It's a pot, Poirot. A shiny one. You want me to arrest it?" Poirot did not look up. "You mock, Inspector, but observe, no smudges, no soot, no fingerprint, freshly burnished, as though someone wished to remove a mark. And yet, I smell something." He lifted the pot to his nose, inhaling deeply, then his eyebrows arched. "Aha! Smells like metal to me," Flint muttered. "No, beneath it, a faint trace of truffle, but not just any truffle, Italian winter truffle. And such a delicacy Victor Harrington used only for his private tasting menus. Yet his stores show none missing." Flint blinked. "Are you suggesting the killer cooked something?" "I suggest," Poirot replied, "that the killer attempted to cook something, or perhaps used this pot for another purpose entirely." Before Flint could question him further, Mrs. Cheswick, the housekeeper, wrung her hands with a nervous tremor. "Mr. Poirot, forgive me, but we don't use that pot. It's decorative. Mr. Harrington insisted it stay polished. No one has touched it in months." Poirot turned to her sharply. "No one?" "No one, sir." Poirot nodded once. "Then let us examine with care." He tilted the pot toward the lamplight, and there, along the bottom interior curve, a faint, almost invisible scratch. Poirot's expression simmered with interest. He removed a small magnifying lens from his pocket, peering through it with quiet intensity. "Inspector," he said, "would you be so kind as to bring me a pair of tweezers?" Grumbling, Flint retrieved them. Poirot reached into the pot, delicately plucking something from the nearly invisible groove. A fragment, thin, dull, metallic, rested between the tweezers. "What is that?" Flint asked. Poirot placed it on a nearby dish. "A shaving of steel, from a blade." Flint's jaw went slack. "A knife? But none of the kitchen knives match." "Just so." Poirot's voice warmed with satisfaction. "Which tells us the murderer brought their own blade, and in haste or force broke the tip or edge against this pot. The fragment lodged here, later polished over but not removed entirely. Imperfection," he tapped the dish lightly, "is most revealing." Mrs. Cheswick gasped. "But why would someone strike a pot?" Poirot met her eyes. "My dear madam, because Victor Harrington crawled toward this corner before he died." The room seemed to contract. Even the kitchen lamps flickered. Poirot continued, voice low and precise. "He attempted to flee. The killer raised the blade. Harrington, weakened but desperate, grabbed the pot, likely to shield himself. The blow struck the copper instead of his skull. See the faint dent?" Flint scrambled to look. I didn't notice that before." "No," Poirot said gently, "because you looked for what you expected to see, not what was actually there." He set the pot on the counter, allowing the silence to deepen. Behind him, the suspects, Elias the sous-chef, Mrs. Harrington the widow, and the enigmatic Mr. Alistair Gray, waited in varied states of alarm. Poirot turned to Elias first. "You told us earlier that Mr. Harrington dismissed you from the kitchen at 9 o'clock, and you went straight home." "Yes, sir," Elias said, swallowing. "I didn't come back." Poirot nodded. "And yet your hands carry the faint scent of truffle oil." Elias blanched. "Truffle? No! Chef Harrington used it earlier. I cleaned the scraps." Poirot lifted a hand. "You may relax, monsieur. I do not make accusations, only observations." He shifted his gaze to Mrs. Harrington, whose calm exterior had begun to fracture. "Madame, earlier you said you were unaware your husband had prepared a private tasting menu that night. Yet you made reference to his unusual choice of ingredients, knowledge you should not possess unless you were present. She stiffened. I saw the pantry door open. Anyone could deduce. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Anyone, madame, perhaps. Finally, he faced Alistair Gray, the gentleman who never ate. Gray's expression remained unreadable, as if carved from porcelain. Mr. Gray, Poirot said, you have told us you were merely a guest in the house, and yet your familiarity with the kitchen layout is remarkable. You corrected Inspector Flint's description of the preparation area. How did you know the arrangement so intimately? Gray hesitated. I toured the kitchen with Victor last week. Ah! Poirot's smile was faint, but sharp. Another inconsistency. Victor Harrington despised visitors in his kitchen. He guarded it like a vault. Even his own wife seldom entered. Gray said nothing. His throat bobbed once. Poirot folded his hands. Mes amis, this pot tells a story, one more honest than the stories you have offered. The killer, in attempting to erase the evidence, polished it until it gleamed. Yet they overlooked the fragment. A small mistake. But small mistakes, they are the beginning of revelations. Inspector Flint stepped closer. So, which one of them? Poirot looked around the room slowly, letting the tension reach a near breaking point. Inspector, patience. We must follow the trail of the blade. We must discover who had reason to bring a weapon into this kitchen. And most importantly, we must learn why Victor Harrington feared someone enough to defend himself with a pot rather than shout for help. Mrs. Cheswick whispered, But why would he be afraid? Poirot turned to her. Because he recognized his attacker, madame. And when one recognizes death by name, one does not scream. One pleads. A tremor passed through the suspects. Poirot tapped the copper pot once more. There is a place in this house, a very particular place, where a blade of such fine steel would be kept, if one wished to hide it from common eyes. And that is where we shall go next. Flint frowned. Where? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Victor Harrington's private study. He lifted the pot, carrying it with him like a priceless artifact, or a loaded gun. Without another word, he stepped toward the hallway. Behind him, 3 suspects watched, each wearing gilt of a different flavor. And one of them, Poirot knew, recognized the pot not as a clue, but as a threat. Chapter 9. The Private Study and the Hidden Ledger. Poirot paused before the heavy oak door of Victor Harrington's private study. The room was familiar in outline, yet now, in the shadow of murder, it seemed a labyrinth of secrets. He could feel the history pressing against the walls. Every book and painting holding silent witness to a man's life, and perhaps to his death. He turned the key slowly in the lock, careful not to disturb the faint layer of dust on the threshold. Inside, the study smelled faintly of leather ink and something metallic beneath it. A faint red stain marred the edge of the desk blotter, a mark that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. Poirot crouched to inspect it, running a gloved fingertip lightly over the smear. Blood, he murmured, and very fresh, too fresh for initial examination. Flint, standing behind him, muttered, We checked this room yesterday. No blood, Poirot. Are you sure? Oui, Inspector. One must observe the subtle, not merely the obvious, Poirot said, rising and sweeping his gaze across the room. And now we look for what is hidden. He moved to the tall bookcase near the fireplace, tapping each shelf lightly. The hollow sound of one shelf caught his attention. He pressed against it, once, twice. The bookcase shivered slightly. Poirot's gloved hand slipped behind a row of thick volumes and found a latch. a concealed compartment swung open, revealing a small iron-bound box. "Ah," Poirot breathed, "here lies the second ledger." The box contained papers meticulously stacked and tied with black ribbons. He lifted one sheet and saw entries, written in Victor Harrington's sharp, confident hand. Names, dates, amounts of money, and crucially, notes in the margins, threats, veiled warnings and references to the kitchen staff. Some were familiar names, Hector Blythe, Mrs. Potts, but others were hidden behind initials, cryptic and deliberate. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, the truth emerges, and with it motive multiplies. Inspector Flint leaned closer. "So this is the ledger the killer wanted to hide?" "Exactement," Poirot said, "and why it is vital. For whoever committed this crime, the ledger was dangerous. It exposed secrets, it exposed greed, it exposed ambition." He held a page to the light. "Observe here, a note in red ink, handle with care, E.H. Flint frowned. "E.H. That's Eleanor Harrington." Poirot nodded slowly. Madame Harrington was far more entwined in her husband's dealings than she allowed anyone to suspect. This is why she wished me to speak with her privately last week. The ledger reveals leverage, and leverage breeds conflict. He turned the pages carefully, noting not just financial entries but small coded remarks. KP, AB, late kitchen delivery, wine tasting, remove, Poirot murmured under his breath. Someone in this house knew how to manipulate Victor's operations and Victor's trust without leaving a trace. Flint's voice was skeptical. "You're saying the killer isn't just angry or greedy? They're meticulous." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactly, Inspector. Meticulous, patient, and bold enough to strike at the heart of Harrington's empire and hide the instrument of death, the butcher's knife." He paused, examining a fold in one of the ledger pages. Small, nearly invisible impressions marked the paper, letters pressed from another document. Poirot smiled faintly. "This is clever. The killer left behind what they thought was imperceptible, a message only I would detect. They underestimate me, perhaps, but that is a most useful flaw." He replaced the papers gently in the box, ensuring each was aligned perfectly. Then he turned to Flint. "The next step is confrontation. With the ledger in hand, we now know who had motive, opportunity, and the knowledge to commit the crime." "Which is everyone?" Flint muttered. Poirot smiled, his eyes sharp. "Oui, everyone. But notice carefully, Inspector. Everyone except the one who acted in panic, who left the blade fragment in the copper pot, who polished it to conceal their error. That person made a single mistake, and mistakes are the language of murder." He moved toward the door. "We must speak with the suspects. Each one will be questioned again, but now with the ledger and the pot as evidence, and the revelation will unsettle them, yes, but one will crack." Flint frowned. "You think one of them will confess?" Poirot nodded. "Not confess, perhaps, but reveal themselves. We must watch, not only their words, but their gestures, their hesitation, their manner. The smallest tremor tells more than the loudest protestation." He stopped at the doorway, turning to look back at the study. The room, once imposing, now seemed to him a stage set for the final act. Every object, every stain, every book and drawer had been meticulously arranged by Victor Harrington, or by someone who wished to control his legacy even in death. Poirot's thoughts drifted briefly to the anonymous letter that had led him to the cellar. Someone feared exposure. That much was clear. But who? The answer lay in the interplay of the ledger, the copper pot, and the butcher's knife. Each clue was a chord in the symphony of deception. and Poirot, as always, intended to hear the music in full before revealing the conductor. He left the study, the iron-bound box tucked safely under his arm, his mind already plotting the questioning. The suspects waited below, their unease palpable. Poirot entered the drawing-room with deliberate calm. The widow's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the box. Elias Blythe's jaw clenched, and Alistair Gray, for once, did not mask his curiosity. Poirot placed the ledger on the table with a soft but commanding thud. "Mes amis," he said, "the game is nearly concluded. The ledger holds secrets that have caused great harm, even death, and one among you, I believe, acted too boldly to suppress them." He leaned forward, hands resting on the edges of the table. "Now, we shall begin the final questioning, and when it is over, all will be revealed." The room fell silent, thick with tension, as each suspect shifted in their seat, aware that the web was tightening and the net drawing inexorably closer. Poirot's calm demeanour only intensified the pressure, for in his quiet confidence, everyone sensed the inevitability of exposure. In that silence, Poirot allowed himself the smallest smile. At last, the pieces were aligned, the puzzle nearly complete, and the final act was ready to unfold. Chapter 10. The Confession and the Unmasked Killer. The drawing-room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft ticking of the grand clock on the mantel. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, the iron-bound ledger before him, and the polished copper pot at his side. The suspects, Eleanor Harrington, Hector Blythe, and Alistair Gray, sat rigidly, each aware that the final act had begun. Inspector Flint watched from the corner, arms folded, waiting for the revelation he had doubted would ever come. Poirot cleared his throat. "Mes amis, we have examined motives, opportunities, and subtle clues that most would have overlooked. We have observed hands, expressions, and the faintest tremors of fear. And now we have the ledger, the copper pot, and the fragment of the butcher's knife." His small eyes glimmered, taking in each face in turn. "We know that Victor Harrington was a man who kept many secrets. Some of these secrets protected him, others endangered those around him." Eleanor Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what are you implying, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, voice carefully calm. Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "I am implying, madame, that the person who struck Victor Harrington did so not out of sudden rage, but calculated necessity. They understood the kitchen, the timing, the access to the knife, and the weaknesses of the victim. They also understood the ledger and the danger it posed." He paused, letting the tension swell. "And only one of you meets all these conditions." Hector Blythe shifted in his chair. "You think it was me?" Poirot shook his head. "No, monsieur. You were angry, yes, perhaps envious, but your loyalty was evident. You would not strike the man who trained you. Your fingerprint on the ledger is absent, and you had no need to polish the copper pot or hide evidence elsewhere." Hector exhaled shakily. Poirot turned to Alistair Gray. "And you, Monsieur Gray, gentleman who never eats, observer of dinners, master of silence. You knew the layout of the kitchen, the habits of the chef, and the timing of the murder. You were seen near the pantry shortly before the scream, yet you claim to have been upstairs. Why?" Gray's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the arms of the chair tightly. I went to speak with Victor," he admitted reluctantly. "I had questions about old business arrangements, nothing more." Poirot nodded slowly. "You told us the truth in part, but your truth was incomplete, and the ledger shows it. You had knowledge of his dealings, and you knew about the payments to keep certain people silent, Payments that you feared might implicate you." Gray's voice dropped to a whisper. "I did not kill him. I swear." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, you did not. But someone used your presence as a diversion." He turned finally to Eleanor Harrington, who had been sitting unnervingly still, her hands folded perfectly on her lap. Poirot's gaze softened slightly, but with the precision of a scalpel. "Madame, you understand the ledger. You understand the payments, the blackmail, the leverage. You also understand fear. And you, madame, were present in the kitchen before the scream." Eleanor's eyes widened. I was not." Poirot held up a single gloved finger. "But the copper pot tells the truth. The faint fingerprints of your glove were detected, not by mere sight, but by subtle chemical traces left, despite the polishing. You struck your husband in a moment of rage, intending only to intimidate, perhaps to scare him into submission. Yet the blow was fatal." Eleanor's breath caught. I only wanted him to stop controlling everything, to stop ruining our lives." "Yes, exactly," Poirot said, nodding slowly. "But your actions, deliberate or not, caused death. And then you attempted to cover it by hiding the knife, polishing the pot, and misleading others. Your knowledge of the ledger made you fear exposure. And so you created a narrative. Hector's temper, Gray's absence, even the anonymous letter to mislead me. But the fragments remain, tiny, overlooked, almost invisible." The widow's hands trembled, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted freedom." Poirot's eyes were gentle, but firm. "Freedom, madame, comes not through violence, but through truth. And now the truth has emerged." Inspector Flint stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. "Madame Harrington, you are under arrest for the murder of Victor Harrington." Eleanor looked down at her hands, silent, realizing the inevitability of her fate. She had tried to manipulate everyone around her, but Poirot's little grey cells had seen through every deception. Poirot turned to Hector and Gray. "Monsieur Blythe, Monsieur Gray, you may return to your lives. Your roles in this drama were vital, yet your innocence is intact. But let this be a lesson. Anger, fear, and loyalty are forces that can be misinterpreted by the untrained eye." Hector exhaled in relief, while Gray simply inclined his head, his composure restored. Poirot lingered for a moment in the kitchen, gazing at the copper pot. It had played an unintentional role as shield, evidence, and silent witness. He polished it carefully with a cloth, reflecting on how the smallest objects can hold the largest truths. "Even in the simplest places," he murmured to Flint, "the truth resides, waiting for patience and observation to uncover it." The murderer underestimated the details, believing the human eye could be deceived. But detail, Inspector, is the soul of investigation. Flint shook his head, incredulous. "I don't know how you do it, Poirot. Every time you see the things no one else notices." Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his moustache. "It is a matter of method, Inspector. Observation, deduction, and respect for the human psyche. And sometimes, the smallest, most humble object, in this case a copper pot, speaks louder than any confession." Eleanor Harrington was led away quietly, murmuring faintly to herself, while the household remained in stunned silence. The ledger, the pot, the fragment of the knife, all had conspired to reveal her guilt. Poirot finally returned to the drawing-room and sat before the late Victor Harrington's portrait. "Victor Harrington, you were a man of brilliance, yet also a man of secrets. And as is often the case, secrets lead to tragedy. The web of human desire is delicate, and when twisted by fear, the consequences can be fatal." He looked around the room at the remaining staff and guests. Let this house remember, not the tragedy alone, but the importance of honesty and transparency. For deception, no matter how cunningly crafted, cannot withstand patient observation and reason. Inspector Flint cleared his throat. Shall we say the case is closed? Poirot nodded, a faint twinkle in his eyes. Oui, Inspector. The case is closed. The murderer unmasked, the truth revealed, the instruments of death accounted for. Justice is served, not swiftly, perhaps, but inevitably. He rose, smoothing his suit, and gave a final glance at the copper pot. And now, the house may breathe again, but the memory of Victor Harrington and the lessons of this tragedy will linger like the aroma of a perfect sauce, subtle yet unforgettable,